Zero wasn't a name anyone knew. It was a ghost whispered in the dark corners of the internet, a legend among hackers, a nightmare for bankers. His real name was lost to time, shed like an old skin when he decided to disappear. He was notorious not just for hacking, but for the scale and audacity of his targets, multinational corporations, government agencies, and, most famously, financial institutions. He lived off-grid, far from the sprawling cities and the prying eyes of the digital world. His home was a small, unassuming cabin nestled deep within a national forest. No neighbors, no paved roads, just the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the constant hum of the generator that powered his isolated existence. Zero had meticulously severed all ties to his past. No social media, no credit cards, no traceable online activity. He paid for everything in cash, grew his own food, and sourced his supplies from local markets, always careful to avoid drawing attention to himself. His only connection to the outside world was a heavily encrypted satellite internet connection, used exclusively for his work. His cabin was a fortress of solitude, but also a technological marvel. Antennas sprouted from the roof, disguised as tree branches. Inside, multiple computers hummed, each dedicated to a specific task: intrusion detection, data analysis, and the actual execution of his hacks. He had built his own security systems, firewalls, and intrusion prevention software, all designed to protect him from the very people who were hunting him. Zero wasn't driven by greed. He saw himself as a vigilante, exposing corruption and fighting against a system he believed was rigged against the common person. He donated a portion of his ill-gotten gains to various charities, further obscuring the source of the funds. He was a master of disguise, both online and in the real world. He could spoof IP addresses, forge digital signatures, and bounce his connections through multiple servers, making it virtually impossible to trace him. He was a ghost, a shadow, a whisper in the wind. Or so he thought. Zero's days were a carefully orchestrated blend of survival and cyber warfare. Each morning, he rose with the sun, not to the jarring sound of an alarm, but to the gentle chorus of birdsong. His first task was tending to his small garden, a patch of earth where he grew vegetables and herbs. It was a grounding ritual, a reminder of the tangible world outside the digital realm he so often inhabited. After breakfast, a simple meal of oatmeal and berries, he would embark on his daily reconnaissance. He patrolled the perimeter of his property, checking for signs of intruders, both human and animal. He was a skilled tracker, able to read the subtle signs of the forest, the broken twigs, the disturbed leaves, the faint scent of a predator. The afternoon was dedicated to his true calling, hacking. He would descend into his basement, the heart of his operation, and immerse himself in the digital world. He spent hours poring over code, analyzing vulnerabilities, and planning his next move. He was a meticulous planner, a chess master of the digital age, always several steps ahead of his opponents. Zero's hacking wasn't a chaotic free-for-all, it was a calculated, precise operation. He studied his targets for weeks, sometimes months, before launching an attack. He mapped their networks, identified their weaknesses, and developed custom exploits to bypass their security systems. He was patient, methodical, and relentless. Evenings were reserved for physical training. He ran through the forest, climbed trees, and practiced martial arts. He knew that his mind was his greatest weapon, but he also understood the importance of physical fitness. He needed to be strong and agile, capable of defending himself if his digital defenses failed. As darkness fell, Zero would return to his cabin, light a fire in the hearth, and reflect on the day's events. He would review his progress, analyze his mistakes, and plan for the future. He was a solitary figure, but he wasn't lonely. He had a purpose, a mission, and he was determined to see it through, always one step ahead. Or so he believed. First Global Bank was an impenetrable fortress, or so it seemed. Its headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of New York City, housed some of the most advanced security systems in the world. Layers upon layers of firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and data encryption algorithms protected its vast financial assets. The bank employed a team of highly skilled cybersecurity experts, former government agents, and ethical hackers, all dedicated to safeguarding its systems from external threats. They constantly monitored network traffic, analyzed security logs, and ran penetration tests to identify and fix vulnerabilities. But First Global Bank was more than just a building and a network. It was a symbol of global finance, a pillar of the world economy. Its systems processed millions of transactions every day, moving trillions of dollars across borders. A successful attack on First Global Bank could have catastrophic consequences, not just for the bank itself, but for the entire financial system. The bank's chief information security officer, Sarah Chen, was a formidable woman, a veteran of countless cyber battles. She had seen it all, from simple phishing scams to sophisticated nation-state attacks. She was a staunch believer in proactive security, constantly innovating and adapting to the ever-evolving threat landscape. Sarah had implemented a zero-trust security model, meaning that no user or device was automatically trusted, regardless of their location or role. Every access request was verified, every transaction was scrutinized, and every potential threat was investigated. She ran frequent drills, simulating real-world attacks to test the readiness of her team and the effectiveness of her defenses. Despite all these precautions, Sarah knew that no system was truly impenetrable. There was always a weak point, a human error, a zero-day vulnerability that could be exploited. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game, a never-ending battle between attackers and defenders. She just hoped that when the inevitable attack came, her team would be ready. She didn't know that Zero had already set his sights on First Global Bank, and that he was about to launch his most audacious and dangerous hack yet. The game was about to begin. Zero's fingers danced across the keyboard, a blur of motion as he navigated the complex network of First Global Bank. Lines of code scrolled across his monitors, a digital tapestry woven with intricate algorithms and hidden vulnerabilities. He had been studying the bank's systems for months, patiently mapping its defenses, probing for weaknesses. He started with reconnaissance, scanning the bank's public-facing servers, looking for outdated software or misconfigured settings. He used a variety of tools, each designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities. He was like a digital archaeologist, carefully excavating the bank's systems, layer by layer. He bypassed the first firewall with a clever SQL injection attack, exploiting a vulnerability in the bank's website. He gained access to a database containing employee credentials, but they were heavily encrypted. He spent days cracking the encryption, using a combination of brute force attacks and dictionary attacks. Once he had the credentials, he was able to log into the bank's internal network. But he quickly discovered that the bank had implemented multi-factor authentication, requiring a second form of verification, such as a one-time code sent to a mobile device. Zero was undeterred. He used social engineering to trick an employee into revealing their one-time code. He posed as a help desk technician, claiming that there was a problem with the employee's account and that he needed the code to verify their identity. It was a risky move, but it worked. With access to the internal network, Zero began to move laterally, exploring the bank's systems, looking for the critical assets he needed to reach. He discovered a database containing sensitive financial information, including customer account numbers, balances, and transaction histories. He knew that he was getting close. He could almost taste the victory. But he also knew that he had to be careful. The bank's security systems were constantly monitoring for suspicious activity. One wrong move could trigger an alarm and alert the authorities. He proceeded with caution, moving slowly and deliberately, like a surgeon performing a delicate operation. He was now inside the beast. The core banking system was the heart of First Global Bank, the vault where all the money was stored. It was protected by multiple layers of security, including biometric authentication, hardware security modules, and real-time fraud detection systems. Getting to it was like trying to break into Fort Knox. Zero knew that he couldn't simply walk in through the front door. He had to find a back door, a hidden vulnerability that he could exploit. He spent hours analyzing the core banking system's code, looking for weaknesses. He discovered a buffer overflow vulnerability in a legacy application that was used to process international wire transfers. It was an old application, one that had been overlooked by the bank's security team. Zero crafted a custom exploit that would allow him to execute arbitrary code on the server running the application. He tested the exploit in a virtual environment, making sure that it worked flawlessly. He launched the exploit, and the server crashed. An alarm blared in the bank's security operations center. Sarah Chen and her team sprang into action, trying to identify the source of the attack. They quickly realized that the core banking system was under siege. Zero had bypassed the biometric authentication by injecting his own code into the system's memory. He was now able to log in as any user, including the bank's chief financial officer. He transferred a large sum of money, $50 million, from the bank's accounts to a series of offshore accounts that he had set up in advance. The transfer triggered another alarm, but Zero was already one step ahead. He had disabled the fraud detection system, preventing it from flagging the transaction as suspicious. He erased his tracks, deleting logs and covering his digital footprints. The money was gone. Zero had pulled off the impossible. He had successfully hacked First Global Bank and stolen $50 million. He leaned back in his chair, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He had won. Or so he thought. He didn't know that his biggest mistake was yet to come. Zero allowed himself a rare moment of celebration. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff he usually saved for special occasions. He raised the glass in a toast to himself, to his skills, to his victory over the seemingly impenetrable First Global Bank. He checked the offshore accounts, verifying that the money had arrived safely. $50 million. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. He could disappear, start a new life, live like a king. But that wasn't his goal. He wasn't driven by greed. He was driven by a desire to expose the corruption and injustice of the system. As he savored his success, the lights flickered and died. The generator had failed. Zero cursed under his breath. He had been meaning to refill the fuel tank for days, but he had been too focused on the hack. Now, in the middle of the night, he was plunged into darkness. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside to inspect the generator. It was completely dead. He tried to restart it, but it wouldn't budge. He was stranded. He had no power, no internet, no way to communicate with the outside world. He knew that he needed to confirm that the transfer had fully cleared before the bank noticed and reversed it. The money was in untraceable accounts, but a reversal would raise red flags and trigger an investigation, putting him at risk. He needed to get back online, just for a few minutes. He thought about his options. He could wait until morning and drive into town to buy more fuel. But that would take too long. The bank could discover the hack at any moment. He needed to act fast. He remembered the gas station a few miles down the road. It had free Wi-Fi. It was a risky move, but he felt he had no choice. He grabbed his laptop and jumped into his truck. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. A moment of carelessness would undo months of careful planning. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The gas station was a beacon of light in the darkness, a small convenience store with a brightly lit parking lot. Zero parked his truck around the back, away from the security cameras. He pulled out his laptop, booted it up, and connected to the free Wi-Fi. He knew it was a risk. Public Wi-Fi hotspots were notorious for being insecure. Anyone could be monitoring the traffic, intercepting passwords, and stealing data. But he had taken precautions. He used a VPN to encrypt his connection and masked his IP address. He quickly logged into his offshore accounts and confirmed that the money had arrived. The transfer was complete. He breathed a sigh of relief. He had done it. He was in the clear. He disconnected from the Wi-Fi, shut down his laptop, and started his truck. As he pulled away from the gas station, he glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw nothing suspicious. He thought he was safe. What he didn't know was that the gas station's Wi-Fi router had location tracking enabled. The store owner, a tech-savvy teenager, had installed it to monitor customer traffic and optimize product placement. He never thought it would be used to catch a cybercriminal. The router had recorded Zero's laptop's MAC address and the time of the connection. It had also pinpointed his location within a few feet. That information, seemingly insignificant, was about to become the key to unlocking the mystery of the first global bank hack. Zero drove back to his cabin, feeling a sense of elation. He had pulled off the perfect crime. He had outsmarted the best security experts in the world. He was untouchable. He refueled the generator, restored power to his cabin, and settled in for the night, completely unaware that the authorities were already on his trail, closing in with every passing minute. His moment of triumph was about to turn into a nightmare. The morning after the hack, chaos reigned at First Global Bank. Sarah Chen and her team worked tirelessly, piecing together the events of the previous night. The initial assessment was grim. $50 million was gone, vanished into the digital ether. The bank's systems were scoured, logs were analyzed, and every possible lead was pursued. But Zero had been meticulous. He had erased his tracks, covered his footprints, and left behind very little evidence. The investigators felt like they were chasing a ghost. Sarah Chen was determined to catch the hacker. She assembled a team of the best cybersecurity experts in the world, including former FBI agents, NSA analysts, and ethical hackers. They worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. They traced the attack back to a series of proxy servers located in different countries. Zero had bounced his connection through multiple locations, making it difficult to pinpoint his true origin. It was like trying to follow a maze with constantly shifting walls. They examined the code that Zero had used to exploit the vulnerability in the legacy application. It was sophisticated and well-crafted, suggesting that the hacker was highly skilled. They ran the code through various analysis tools, hoping to identify any unique characteristics or signatures. They looked for patterns in Zero's behavior, analyzing his login times, his network traffic, and his code execution patterns. They tried to create a profile of the hacker, to understand his motivations and his methods. Days turned into nights, and the investigation stalled. The team was frustrated and exhausted. They had hit a dead end. It seemed like Zero had gotten away with the perfect crime. But Sarah Chen refused to give up. She knew that every hacker, no matter how skilled, made mistakes. She just had to find that one mistake. She told her team, "We dig deeper. We miss nothing." The pressure was on. The world was watching. The reputation of First Global Bank was on the line. And Sarah Chen was determined to restore it, one bite at a time. Days into the investigation, a junior analyst, David, bleary-eyed and fueled by caffeine, was sifting through network logs, searching for any anomaly, any deviation from the norm. He was assigned to look at the connections right before and after the breach. Most of the connections were bouncing around through proxies, as expected. Then, he noticed something odd. A single, brief connection to a public Wi-Fi hotspot. It lasted only a few minutes, but it stood out like a sore thumb. It wasn't routed through a proxy server. It was a direct connection, originating from a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. David knew that it could be a red herring, a false lead. But he also knew that it was worth investigating. He brought it to Sarah Chen's attention. She was skeptical at first. It seemed too simple, too obvious. But she trusted David's instincts. She contacted the gas station owner and asked for the Wi-Fi router logs. The owner, eager to help, provided the logs immediately. The logs confirmed that a device had connected to the Wi-Fi at the exact time of the transfer. Even more intriguing, the router had location tracking enabled. It had recorded the device's MAC address and its approximate location within the gas station. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they had. Sarah Chen assembled a small team and traveled to the gas station. They reviewed the security camera footage from that night. They saw a man in a baseball cap and a hoodie sitting in a truck in the parking lot, using a laptop. The footage was grainy and the man's face was partially obscured. But it was enough to give them a starting point. They ran the footage through facial recognition software, but it didn't produce any matches. The man was either a master of disguise, or he wasn't in the system. But Sarah Chen wasn't discouraged. She knew that they were getting closer. The ghost was starting to materialize. They were about to turn the tables on Zero. The hunter would soon become the hunted. The game was far from over. Sarah Chen zoomed in on the security footage, pixel by pixel, trying to enhance the image of the man in the baseball cap and hoodie. The man's face was still partially obscured, but she could make out some details: a strong jawline, a slight scar above his left eyebrow, and piercing blue eyes. She showed the footage to her team, asking if anyone recognized him. No one did. They ran the footage through more sophisticated facial recognition software, but still no matches. It was as if the man had no digital footprint. Frustrated, Sarah decided to take a different approach. She asked the gas station owner if he recognized the man. The owner studied the footage carefully, scratching his head. "I don't know," he said. "I see a lot of faces here. But he looks familiar." Sarah pressed him for more information. "Think hard," she said. "It's important." The owner thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. "Wait a minute," he said. "I think I saw him at the hardware store the other day. He was buying a generator." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A generator. That was a key piece of information. She asked the owner to describe the man's truck. He described a beat-up pickup truck, the same truck that was visible in the security footage. Sarah contacted the hardware store and asked if they had any records of a recent generator purchase. They did. The customer had paid in cash and hadn't provided any contact information. But they had a security camera that might have captured a better image of his face. Sarah drove to the hardware store and reviewed the security footage. The image was clearer than the gas station footage. She could see the man's face more clearly. She ran the footage through facial recognition software again. This time, the software produced a possible match. It was a low-confidence match, but it was enough to pique her interest. The match was to an old mugshot of a man named David Miller, a known hacker who had disappeared off the grid several years ago. The photo was years old, and he looked quite different now. Sarah compared the mugshot to the security footage, noting the similar jawline, the scar above the eyebrow, and the piercing blue eyes. She was convinced. David Miller, also known as Zero, was their man. The ghost had finally been identified. The hunt was on. With Zero's real identity revealed, Sarah Chen's team delved deeper into his past. They unearthed old online profiles, forum posts, and even some leaked chat logs. They discovered that David Miller had been a brilliant but rebellious computer science student who had dropped out of college after getting caught hacking into the university's mainframe. He had been involved in several hacking groups and had a reputation for being a skilled and fearless hacker. He had a strong ideological streak, believing that information should be free and that corporations were evil. It became clear that his motive for hacking First Global Bank wasn't just about the money. They also found evidence that Miller had been living off the grid for several years. He had sold his house, closed his bank accounts, and disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. But now, thanks to that one fateful connection to the gas station Wi-Fi, they had a location. They knew that Miller had been in the vicinity of the gas station just a few days ago. They also knew that the gas station was located in a remote area, surrounded by dense forest. Sarah Chen contacted the FBI and requested their assistance. She explained the situation and provided them with all the evidence they had gathered. The FBI immediately launched a manhunt. They mobilized agents from across the country and deployed them to the area surrounding the gas station. They set up roadblocks, conducted door-to-door searches, and used helicopters to scan the forest from above. They were determined to catch Zero, to bring him to justice for his crimes. The FBI agents knew that Miller was a dangerous and resourceful individual. He was a skilled hacker, a survivalist, and a master of disguise. They knew that catching him wouldn't be easy. But they were confident that they would succeed. They had a name, a face, and a location. They were closing in on Zero. The net was tightening. His days of freedom were numbered. The game was about to enter its final, most dangerous phase. The FBI agents spread out from the gas station, fanning into the surrounding forest. The terrain was rugged and unforgiving, a dense tangle of trees, bushes, and rocks. It was the perfect place to disappear. Tracking someone in such a remote area was a challenge. There were no roads, no trails, and no landmarks. The agents relied on their training, their instincts, and their technology. They used GPS devices, thermal imaging cameras, and even dogs to try to locate Zero's hideout. The search was slow and painstaking. The agents had to contend with the elements, the wildlife, and the constant threat of booby traps. They knew that Zero was a skilled survivalist and that he wouldn't make it easy for them. The helicopters provided aerial surveillance, scanning the forest for any signs of human activity. They looked for smoke from campfires, clearings in the trees, or any other anomalies. But the forest was dense, and it was difficult to see anything from above. The agents interviewed local residents, asking if they had seen anyone matching Zero's description. Most of them hadn't. The area was sparsely populated, and people kept to themselves. But a few of them remembered seeing a man in a beat-up pickup truck buying supplies at the local hardware store. The agents followed up on those leads, searching for the truck. They found it parked near a trailhead, hidden beneath a tarp. It was a major break in the case. They knew that Zero was close. They set up a perimeter around the trailhead, hoping to catch Zero when he returned to his truck. They waited patiently, hidden in the trees, their weapons drawn. The tension was palpable. They knew that a confrontation was inevitable. It was only a matter of time before Zero showed up. The final act was about to begin. Zero had been enjoying his solitude, confident that he had covered his tracks. He had even allowed himself to relax a little, venturing into town to pick up supplies, something he hadn't done in months. Back at his cabin, he switched on his small, battery-powered radio, tuning into a local news station. He usually avoided the news, but curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to know if First Global Bank had acknowledged the hack. The news report confirmed his worst fears. The bank had admitted to being the victim of a cyber attack and that a large sum of money had been stolen. The report also mentioned that the FBI was investigating and that they were focusing on a connection to a public Wi-Fi hotspot at a gas station near the town of Ashwood. Zero's blood ran cold. He realized his mistake. The gas station. The Wi-Fi. The location tracking. He had been so careful, so meticulous, but he had let his guard down for just a moment, and it had cost him everything. He knew that it was only a matter of time before the FBI tracked him down. He had to move, and he had to move fast. He couldn't afford to waste any time. He had to abandon his cabin, his equipment, and everything he had worked for. He quickly gathered his essential supplies, food, water, a map, a compass, and a weapon. He destroyed his computers, wiping their hard drives and smashing them into pieces. He burned any documents that could identify him or his activities. He knew that the FBI would be looking for him, but he also knew that he had an advantage. He knew the forest, he knew how to survive in the wilderness, and he knew how to disappear. He was a ghost, and he was about to become even more elusive. He slipped out of his cabin, melting into the shadows of the forest. He left everything behind, except for the skills and the knowledge that had kept him alive for so long. He was a hunted man, but he wasn't giving up without a fight. He was Zero, and he was about to test the limits of his abilities. The chase was on, and he was determined to win. Zero moved quickly and efficiently, driven by adrenaline and a desperate desire to escape. He knew that the FBI would be swarming the area soon, and he couldn't afford to be caught in their net. He navigated the forest with ease, his senses heightened, his mind focused. He used his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage, choosing routes that were difficult to traverse and avoiding areas where he might be easily spotted. He moved silently, like a ghost, leaving no trace of his passage. He knew how to read the signs of the forest, how to identify animal trails, and how to avoid making noise. He was a master of stealth, a shadow in the woods. As he moved further away from his cabin, he came across a stream. He stopped to refill his water bottle and to wash his face. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He knew that he couldn't afford to panic. He had to stay focused and think clearly. He heard the sound of helicopters in the distance. They were getting closer. He knew that he had to find a place to hide. He spotted a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. It was the perfect place to lie low for a while. He crawled into the cave, squeezing through a narrow opening. The cave was dark and damp, but it was safe. He could hear the helicopters flying overhead, but they couldn't see him. He waited patiently, listening to the sound of the water cascading down the rocks. He knew that the FBI wouldn't give up easily. They would search the forest for days, maybe even weeks. He had to be prepared for a long siege. He had to conserve his supplies and stay hidden. He was in a battle of wits, a game of cat and mouse. And he was determined to survive. His freedom depended on it. The hunter had become the hunted, but he was still fighting. The FBI agents were methodical in their search, slowly and deliberately combing through the forest. They followed every stream, checked every cave, and searched every clearing. They were determined to find Zero, no matter how long it took. One of the agents, a young woman named Agent Reynolds, noticed something unusual near a waterfall. She saw a faint trail of footprints leading towards the base of the falls. She approached cautiously, her weapon drawn. She discovered a small cave hidden behind the waterfall, almost invisible to the naked eye. She signaled to her team, and they surrounded the cave. They knew that Zero was inside. "David Miller, this is the FBI. Come out with your hands up." Agent Reynolds shouted. There was no response. The only sound was the rushing water. The agents waited patiently, their weapons trained on the cave entrance. They knew that Zero was armed and dangerous. They had to be prepared for anything. After several minutes of silence, Zero emerged from the cave, his hands raised. He was wearing camouflage clothing and a backpack. He looked tired and defeated. "Don't move," Agent Reynolds commanded. Zero stood still, his eyes fixed on the agents. The tension was thick in the air. "I know why you're here," Zero said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over. Get on the ground," Agent Reynolds ordered. Zero complied, kneeling down and placing his hands behind his head. The agents rushed forward and handcuffed him. They searched him and his backpack, finding a knife, a map, a compass, and a small amount of cash. They also found a laptop, which they carefully bagged as evidence. The standoff was over. Zero had been captured. The hunt was finally complete. The ghost had been brought to justice. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of the stolen money and the trial that was to come. And Sarah Chen knew that Zero still had a few tricks up his sleeve. This was far from over. Zero was transported to a high-security prison, his off-grid life and hacking career abruptly ended. The world that he had so carefully constructed, the digital fortress that he had built, had crumbled because of one small slip-up, one moment of carelessness. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The laptop that was seized from him contained traces of the malware he had used to hack into First Global Bank. His fingerprints were found on the generator he had purchased at the hardware store. And the gas station's Wi-Fi logs placed him at the scene of the crime. He was charged with multiple counts of computer fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He faced decades in prison. His lawyers advised him to plead guilty and cooperate with the authorities, but he refused. He maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been framed. Sarah Chen was determined to recover the stolen money. She worked with law enforcement agencies around the world, tracing the funds through a complex network of offshore accounts. She was able to recover a portion of the money, but a significant amount remained missing. Zero's trial was a media sensation. The world watched as the notorious hacker faced justice. He was portrayed as a villain, a criminal, and a threat to national security. But he was also seen as a hero by some, a symbol of rebellion against corporate greed and government corruption. The trial lasted for weeks. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Zero, but his lawyers fought back fiercely. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the prosecution had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. In the end, the jury found Zero guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His off-grid life and hacking career were over, all because of a single moment of weakness, a brief connection to a public Wi-Fi hotspot. It was a harsh lesson, a reminder that even the most skilled and careful individuals can make mistakes. And sometimes, those mistakes can have devastating consequences. The ghost was finally silenced. In the aftermath of Zero's capture and conviction, the world took notice. First Global Bank invested heavily in upgrading its security systems, implementing even more stringent measures to protect its assets and its customers' data. Sarah Chen became a celebrated figure in the cybersecurity world, a symbol of resilience and determination. The story of Zero served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of digital security in an increasingly connected world. It highlighted the vulnerabilities that exist even in the most secure systems and the consequences of even the smallest mistake. The incident also sparked a debate about the ethics of hacking and the role of hackers in society. Some argued that Zero was a criminal who deserved to be punished for his crimes. Others saw him as a folk hero, a champion of the people who had dared to challenge the powerful corporations. The story of Zero became a legend, whispered in the dark corners of the internet, a reminder that even the most skilled and elusive individuals can be brought to justice. It was a story about technology, about security, about ethics, and about the human condition. The world is more aware of the dangers that lurk in the digital shadows. It is a world where a single click can unleash chaos, where a moment of carelessness can have devastating consequences, and where the line between right and wrong is often blurred. Zero's legacy lives on, not as a hero or a villain, but as a reminder of the power and the peril of the digital age. The story of his rise and fall serves as a lesson for everyone, to be vigilant, to be careful, and to be aware of the risks that exist in the digital world. Because in the end, even the smallest mistake can cost you everything. The world continues to spin, a little more wary, a little more protected, and a little more aware of the ghost that once haunted its digital landscape. And somewhere, in a high-security prison, Zero sits alone, contemplating the consequences of his actions, forever haunted by the memory of that one fateful connection to a public Wi-Fi hotspot.